The Deathworlder girl was told to stay calm, so she only broke the table, not the room. The hearing started at 9 in the morning, and by 8:54 I had already decided the stylus in my hand was going to be the most interesting thing in the room. It was silver. Scratched at the cap. Someone had chewed the top end before I inherited it, and I found that oddly comforting. Evidence of another person who had once sat in a very long meeting and needed somewhere to put their restlessness. 7 dignitaries. 2 translators. 1 administrative clerk named Sisik who had been quietly misfiling my incident reports for 4 months and smiling about it in the small, practiced way of someone absolutely certain you haven't noticed. I had noticed every single one. The room was shaped like a half-moon. Pale composite walls. Recessed lighting calibrated for species-neutral visibility, which in practice meant it was too blue for human eyes to fully relax under. I had been squinting for 14 months. My chair was 2 centimeters shorter than every other chair at the table. I didn't bring it up. Commander Velhas of the Veth delegation spoke, and the translator kept 3 seconds behind him, converting careful syllables into something my earpiece could carry. The commander's voice was heavy and self-assured, like gravel that has already decided where it is going and does not need to hurry. He used the word involuntary 4 times in the opening summary. He used destabilizing twice. He used the phrase biological volatility event once, and I wrote it on the back of my procedural brief because it was too precise an absurdity to lose. Biological volatility event. 14 months on Thresh, 9, and that was the most accurate thing anyone had said about me. The incident under review was last Tuesday. At a staff social function in the secondary briefing lounge, I had laughed at a joke. A real laugh, genuine, because the joke had been actually funny, and I have a rule about not faking it when something lands. The Veth junior officer across the table had gone gray-green, which is the color Veth go instead of pale, and sat down very fast and had not gotten up again for 22 minutes. The station medical log marked it as a stress response. The incident report labeled my laugh a sonic predation display. I had been eating a cracker. While the dignitaries each added their entries to the record, I watched the stylus. Turned it in my fingers. The scratched cap caught the blue-white light and scattered it in small, quiet ways. The translator with the braided head crests kept glancing at my hands. I held the stylus still and gave her nothing to document. Then Sisik cleared his throat. His throat was built to produce a sound that hit human hearing at precisely the wrong frequency. Biological, probably. He used it now with the timing of someone who had practiced the effect. He straightened his papers with 2 deliberate taps on the table edge. He looked at me once, quickly, the way you check that something is where you left it. He began to read. The report was thorough. I will give him that. It covered the laugh incident in careful detail. It covered a cargo incident from 8 months ago that I had honestly forgotten was on record, when the Dock 6 loading arm had seized mid-operation and I had moved a supply crate blocking the entry because 4 ships were on timed berths and the technical team was 40 minutes out and the crate was in the way. The report noted the crate's listed mass. It noted that I had moved it with, according to witnesses, an expression of mild inconvenience. It covered the sparring session logs. A mealtime observation. And 1 entry, near the back, that I had to read twice, a report filed about the way I walked through the station at night. My walk. Someone had documented my walk. I kept my eyes on the stylus. Sisik reached the conclusion. You could hear it in his rhythm, a slight adjustment in cadence, the particular breath of someone who has been waiting to get to the part they have already decided is true. He read it evenly, without commentary, which is its own kind of commentary. He said that based on the accumulated evidence, the human liaison Maravas displayed consistent uncontrolled aggression and could not be trusted to self-regulate in a diplomatic environment. Cannot be trusted to self-regulate. I set the stylus down. Looked at it for 1 second. Put both palms flat on the table. Later I would look up the pressure tolerance rating of compact standard composite furniture. At that moment I was not thinking about pressure ratings. I was thinking about 14 months of incident reports filed into incorrect categories so they never reached the review board. I was thinking about the coffee shortage on Deck 7, open since month 3 of my assignment, 2 formal requests submitted, 0 responses, because coffee was a human-specific dietary preference and the station prioritized species-neutral supplies. I was thinking about the junior officer who had backed away from me in a corridor 6 weeks ago without a word, and I had been holding my lunch tray, and I had stood there with nowhere to look except the space where he had been, and I had said nothing. I had always said nothing. That was the arrangement. The table cracked along the center. Clean. Decisive. The sound it made was like the last word in a conversation that had run far past its useful length. Both halves separated by 4 centimeters and held. The composite had not collapsed. It had simply disagreed with itself along a central line, which was a form of disagreement I understood. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I picked up the stylus from the left half and moved it to the right half, because I needed something to do with my hands. Then I looked at Sisik. "I'm being very calm right now," I said. 3 dignitaries left the room. Not quickly. Like a tide going out, steady, purposeful, not looking back. The first translator's earpiece fell from his ear. He did not reach for it. The second translator sat very still with both hands in her lap and her eyes fixed on the wall behind me. A junior officer at the far end of the table was staring at the 2 halves of the table with an expression I had no reference for. Not fear. Something that had been fear and passed through it and had not found solid ground on the other side yet. Sisik did not move. I respected that. Commander Velhas spoke in Veth. Neither translator relayed it. "The table is structurally intact," I said. "Both halves are level." The silence had weight. The hearing was officially suspended 9 minutes later. I was asked, very politely, and I noticed the very politely the way you notice an unexpected piece of furniture in a room you thought you knew, to remain available for further proceedings. I agreed. I collected my brief and my stylus and walked out at a pace I considered measured and appropriate. Behind me, as the door closed, I heard Sisik say something to Commander Velhas in a low voice. 4 words reached me. She was holding back. I kept walking. The corridor outside the hearing room was empty. Station hours had most crew at secondary posts. The blue-white lighting ran the full length of the hallway and my footsteps were the only sound, and I was aware of this because I am always aware of sound levels in enclosed spaces. Old habit. Useful one. I passed a data terminal mounted at their shoulder height. 2 centimeters too low for me. I caught my reflection in the polished casing, slightly distorted, the way reflections always are in surfaces that were not designed to be mirrors. I looked at myself for 1 second. Then I walked to the Deck 4 commissary. They carried a substitute blend that was not coffee in any technical sense but was warm and dark and bitter enough to work if you met it without expectations. I ordered 1 cup. Stood at the counter and drank it standing up, because I always drink coffee standing up. Because that is the habit you build when you have spent enough time not knowing how long you have before you need to move. Behind me, I found out later, Sisik filed a revised report. 2 sentences. The hearing had been suspended following a material incident involving station property. The human liaison had stated, in her own assessment, that she was being very calm. He filed it in the correct category. For the first time in 4 months. I thought about that while the substitute coffee cooled in my hands. About what it costs, exactly, to be seen. About whether the version of yourself you keep contained, the one that breathes through the small frustrations, doesn't comment on chair height, doesn't say the thing you are thinking when a filing clerk smiles at you the way someone smiles at a problem he believes he has managed, about whether that version reads as simply absent. Empty space. A person making no noise, taken for a person who has nothing to say. The table had not been empty space. The table had been a clarification. Both halves were still level. Still functional. Built for pressure and, perhaps, surprised that the pressure had finally been applied, but not broken. Not even close. I finished the coffee. I went back to work. The deposition started on a Wednesday. Internal Affairs on Thresh 9 runs its review windows on Wednesdays, which I know because I read every operational document the station sent me when I boarded 14 months ago. 1 bag, a stack of procedural forms, and the particular tiredness of 11 days on a transport vessel with recycled air and questionable meal schedules. I read everything they sent. You learn more from the shape of how a place is organized than from any single rule it contains. They deposed everyone except me first. I found that interesting. I received the testimony files through standard incident review access. I was a named party to the case, which gave me rights to the record, and I suspect the filing permissions had not fully anticipated that. 16 witness testimonies. I read all of them in a single afternoon, sitting in my quarters with the door open. I keep doors open unless I close them myself. Another old habit. Another useful one. 16. I turned the number over for a while. Then I made a grocery list, because the substitute blend on deck 4 was getting critical and supply requests only go somewhere when you put them in writing, and I had been putting things in writing on this station for 14 months with mixed results, but I was not going to stop. The first testimony was from OSS Ren, a VETH cargo officer on Dock 6. He described the loading arm incident from 8 months ago. The arm had seized mid-operation, blocking the dock entry. 3 ships on timed berths. Technical team 40 minutes out. He described watching me move the crate. He had checked the crate's listed weight twice before writing his testimony to make sure he had the number right. He described my expression as mild inconvenience. Not the act itself. The face I had made during it. He said he had not filed a report at the time because he did not know what the report would say. He had figured out what to say eventually. The second testimony was from Yis, a VETH medical technician in the station's care facility. 6 months into my assignment, I had caught a maintenance panel edge wrong in the junction between Corridor 7 and the equipment bay, a badly finished corner with a sharp lip that nobody had bothered to smooth down. The result had been significant. I had walked to the medical bay on my own, sat down, looked at my arm, said that one got me, and asked if she had anything warm to drink while she worked. Yis noted in her testimony that she had treated similar injuries 4 times before in other crew members. In all 4 cases, the patient had arrived with assistance from multiple crew and had required sedation for the procedure. I had asked about the drinks twice. She had found me a cup of station broth. I had thanked her when she finished. After I left, she looked up human pain response profiles in the compact medical database. She read them twice. Then she sat at her desk for a while without doing anything else. I added pain relief tablets to the grocery list, human-compatible formulation, and moved on to the third testimony. The third was from Fel, a first-rotation VETH crew member who had been on Thresh 9 for 2 months. The equivalent of 22 in human years. He had been on night corridor duty when he saw me walking the station. I walk the corridors at night sometimes. The station is quieter then. The lighting shifts to amber during night hours, which is closer to something my eyes can fully relax under. I had not known anyone was watching. Fel described seeing me from 40 meters down the corridor. He described the way I moved. He tried several comparisons in his testimony, crossed them out, and settled eventually on this, something that had spent a long time learning to move through spaces that were not made for it. He said he had pressed himself to the corridor wall and held still until I passed. He said I had glanced at him once. He said the glance was not threatening. He searched for a word and came back to it twice in the testimony before settling on aware. Completely aware, like I had registered him before he registered me, and had already made all the decisions that needed making before he had even processed that there was a situation requiring decisions. He had gone back to his quarters after his shift and started writing a letter home. He had not sent it. I wrote coffee, any kind, not fussy on the grocery list. The fourth testimony was from a commissary worker who had watched me eat lunch once and documented the pace of it, which he found difficult to categorize. The fifth was from a maintenance worker in Subcorridor 9 who had heard me humming something while I walked past during a repair job, and had not known whether it was a signal or a communication or simply a sound a human makes for reasons unrelated to any external audience, and had documented the uncertainty itself because he had felt the uncertainty deserved a record. The sixth was from a maintenance supervisor who had walked past the exercise bay observation port during one of my sparring sessions and stopped. He had watched for 12 minutes. He used the word methodical twice and systematic once. He noted no visible exertion, which was not quite accurate because I sweat and breathe harder and am not a machine, but I understood what he meant. He meant my limit was not where he expected it, and the absence of that visible edge had been the thing he watched for 12 minutes trying to locate. He filed his report the following morning. 7 through 12 were smaller. A person who had seen something ordinary, felt something they had no category for, and written it down because writing is the closest you can get to making a thing make sense when you do not yet have the sense for it. I understood the impulse completely. I have been documenting things since I was 9 years old, standing in a shelter that smelled like smoke and other people's fear, watching adults write things on clipboards and understanding even then that the clipboards were how they held on to their thinking when their thinking was trying to leave. What they were all documenting, across all 12 testimonies, was a woman doing ordinary things. Moving a heavy object. Eating lunch. Walking down a corridor at night. Asking for something warm to drink after an injury. Humming to herself because she had a long walk ahead and the corridor was empty. They were writing it down because it frightened them. Not what I did. What I was. The 13th testimony was from Josvel, the internal affairs commander overseeing the case. He had not witnessed any incident. He had read my intake form. The form I had filled out 14 months ago standing in the docking registration bay with one bag and a stack of paperwork and the specific exhaustion of someone who has spent 11 days on a transport vessel and is ready to be somewhere that holds still. Under prior medical history, I had written, too many to list, flag anything that surprises you. Under psychological history, I had written, Chicago. He wrote that he had read that word 7 times. He had looked it up in the compact's external records. A city, he wrote. Which had been a city. Which had experienced an infrastructure cascade failure 8 years ago that human records described as a significant civilian displacement and loss event. He noted that the human documentation of this event was brief and factual in a way that, measured against how other compact species document events of comparable scale, was itself a kind of information he had not been prepared to receive. He wrote that brevity in the documentation of very large pain is not an absence of the pain. He wrote that he had needed to sit with that distinction before he could continue with the review. He wrote that he wanted to ask me about Chicago. He wrote that he would not. At the end of his testimony, 6 pages long, written by hand on compact standard paper and then formally transcribed, he wrote his recommendation: no disciplinary action. The hearing had been based on a fundamental misclassification of the subject's behavior. Future engagement protocols for human crew should acknowledge the possibility that what this species demonstrates as restraint may not correspond to any behavioral framework currently in the compact's documentation. He recommended a full review. He recommended that incident case 7741 Thresh be included in new crew orientation materials as a reference point. He did not say for what. He left that for whoever read it to determine. His testimony was 6 pages. My statement had been 43 words. I finished the grocery list. Walked to supply coordination on deck 3. Kelso, the Veth mid-officer who ran residential supply allocation, had always been professionally steady with me, the kind of steady that is not performing calm but has simply decided that steady is the most functional way to be in any situation. She looked at my list. She looked at me. She processed the coffee reorder without comment and told me it would arrive in the next supply cycle. I thanked her. Meant it. Walking back through the amber night lighting, I passed the stretch of corridor where Fell had pressed himself to the wall 6 weeks ago. I stopped. Looked at the space. Looked down the 40 meters where he would have first seen me coming. I had glanced at him because I always note movement. Not threat assessment. Not deliberate calculation. Just attention, the constant low-level attention that developed early because missing things has a cost, and I learned that cost young. He had been a crew member a long way from home, clearly in the difficult first stretch of a new assignment, and I had nodded at him as I passed because it was the smallest acknowledgement I could offer without making something of it, and making something of it was not what he needed. He had started a letter home. I stood in the corridor for a moment. Then I went to my quarters and read until I fell asleep, which took 11 minutes. Fast. It always is. You learn to sleep in places that are not safe and you carry the ability with you into places that are. Chicago. One word. There is nothing to explain that the word does not already say, if you know how to read it. The distress signal came in on a Thursday morning at 6:42, and I had been awake for 20 minutes and had not yet had coffee, which meant the universe had chosen the time deliberately. The signal was from the compact freight vessel Ardell, currently 3 hours out from Thresh, 9 on the outer transit lane. Pirates. Vekari designation, 3 confirmed aboard. 2 crew members injured in the initial boarding. One crew member taken to the NAV station as leverage. Station security had been dispatched and their estimated arrival time was 11 hours. There were 4 other vessels within response range. All 4 carried populations the Valkyrie would consider valuable. I was in the station security office by 6:49. Reth was already there. Reth was my behavioral monitor, a position the Compact had created specifically for this specific assignment, which told me a great deal about how the weeks since the hearing had been going on the administrative side. He was a Veth mid-level liaison, slightly taller than average for his species, with the careful bearing of someone who had read the full file and concluded that careful was the only rational response to its contents. He had been assigned to monitor me 4 weeks ago. In 4 weeks he had not flinched once in my presence. I told him once I found that impressive. He said he was working on it. I had liked him immediately for that. He had a risk assessment form in his hands when I arrived. He was on question 4. The Ardell has one hostage, I said. I had read the alert on my way down the corridor. 1 human crew member. Owen Marsh. Cargo clerk. First interstellar posting. Reth looked at the form. Then at me. Dispatch authorization requires a department review signature and clearance from at least 2 senior. 11 hours, I said. Security team arrival. Yes. 1 person, I said. On his first posting. Reth did not say anything to that. He looked at the form. I started walking toward the equipment lockers. He followed. This was the thing I had not expected about Reth, that when the actual moment came, he did not plant himself between me and the door and site procedure. He followed and kept asking his questions while moving, because he was a behavioral monitor and monitoring was the job, and he did the job even when it required keeping pace with someone who walked like the corridor was already behind her. The equipment locker held standard-issue tactical gear calibrated for compact standard physiology, none of it built for human dimensions. I had spent an afternoon 4 weeks ago making modifications, which had generated 2 new incident reports. I put on what I had adjusted. Reth stood behind me with the form on question 6. Authorization is technically still pending, he said. File it when I'm back, I said. I want to formally note that I am not authorizing this action. Noted. A pause. Then, carefully, I also want to note that the risk assessment form does not contain a category for what you are. I checked the equipment. Once, systematically, the way you check things when checking is memory rather than uncertainty. Everything where it needed to be. Everything functional. Put me under non-standard physiology, I said. That one usually covers it. Reth wrote something. He was on question 7. I walked toward the dock. He walked beside me. Not behind. Beside. The adjustment was small and I did not comment on it. At the dock, he asked, "Are you afraid?" Standard psychological clearance. Protocol question. His voice was level, the voice of someone doing the job correctly because the job matters. I gave it real consideration, because he had earned that. No, I said. He was quiet for a moment. That is the section of the manual I cannot account for, he said. I know. If you fail to return, he started. I won't. If something goes differently then. Reth. He stopped. He's on my list, I said. I said I'd bring him back. I closed the shuttle door. The dock camera recorded that Reth stood at the dock window for a very long time after the shuttle cleared visual range. He was on question 11 of the form. At some point he put the form face down on the console. He watched the empty space where the shuttle had been. Then he picked the form back up. He was thorough. I appreciated that about him more than I had expected to appreciate anything about a behavioral monitor. The shuttle covered the distance in 28 minutes. I spent the transit going over the signal data from the Ardell's internal sensors. 3 Valkyrie heat signatures in the forward section. 2 crew members in the medical hold, injured but stationary, which is the best version of injured in this situation. 1 crew member at the NAV station. And 1 additional Valkyrie signal moving slowly through the aft passage. I adjusted the approach vector and came in through the portside maintenance access, not the secondary cargo bay where the Valkyrie had boarded. The hatch override took 40 seconds. I had estimated 60. I moved through the maintenance shaft, which was narrow and low and smelled like coolant and recycled air and the specific closed-in staleness of a vessel that had been running a long route for a long time without a break. The sounds of the ship settled around me as I moved. The hum of the drives. The faint creak of hull adjustment. The distant, muffled voices of the Valkyrie in the forward section. 3 voices. 3 positions I could map by sound now, added to the sensor data, added to the structural layout of a compact freight vessel which I had pulled up on the shuttle and memorized during the last 6 minutes of transit. I moved toward the NAV station. Owen Marsh was sitting exactly as I had expected. Very still. Both hands resting on the console edge, fingers loose, the careful stillness of someone who has decided that stillness is the safest available action and is holding it with everything they have. He was young. Early 20s. He had the look of someone who had been frightened for long enough that the sharp edge of it had smoothed down into a kind of flat, waiting steadiness. I recognized that look. It is not a bad place to be. Your thinking is cleaner there. He heard me before he saw me. His head came up and turned toward the maintenance access panel as I pushed it open and came through. He stared at me. Owen Marsh, I said, keeping my voice low. He nodded. My name is Maravas. I work on Thresh 9. You are on my list. He looked at me for a moment the way people look at something they very much want to be real and are afraid to trust. He looked like he had several questions. I understood. There was no time. When I signal you, move to the medical hold, I said. Not before. When I signal. You will know the signal. What is the signal? He whispered. It will be obvious, I said. He did not look fully reassured. That was reasonable. I moved into the forward section. The first Valkyrie was in the aft cargo corridor. I heard him before the sensor data updated to show he had changed position. I was already moving. What happened in the next several seconds was efficient and sufficient, and the details of it are less important than what followed. He was sitting against the corridor wall when I moved past him. The second was at the cargo bay access junction. He saw me come around the corner. He said something in Valkyrie, short and sharp, a word that might have been a warning or a command. I said, I know, which was not a response to whatever he had said but was what came to mind, and then the junction was behind me. The third was at the NAV station. Owen was still there, still holding the stillness he had been maintaining. The third Valkyrie was close to him, and the object in his hand was of a category I noted and filed under relevant variables and did not spend additional attention on. He saw me. He said something in Valkyrie. I stopped. He said it again, louder, which was intended to be commanding and was instead a signal that he was working with the tool of volume because other tools were not available to him. I looked at him the way you look at a calculation you have already completed but are reviewing one final time. Then I looked at Owen, who looked back at me with the clear-headed steadiness of someone who had moved past fear into the country on the other side of it. You really want to think about your next move, I said. Not a threat. An honest recommendation. The kind you offer to someone standing on ice who has not yet looked down. He made his next move. I made mine. Owen Marsh was in the medical hold 18 seconds later, sitting next to his 2 injured colleagues, holding a water pack I had taken from the cargo stores. I stood at the hold door and ran a final check of the ship's sensor map. 3 Valkyrie signals, all stationary. 2 crew injured but stable. 1 crew member off the list he had been on and onto a better one. I walked back to Owen. He was looking at his hands when I came in. He looked up. You said it would be obvious, he said. Was it? He thought about it for a moment. Yes, he said. I handed him the water pack. He drank. Then he looked at me the way people look when they have several very large questions and are not sure which one to ask first. Are you going to be in trouble for this? He asked. Some paperwork, I said. He nodded slowly. Paperwork, in his experience, was a thing that could be navigated. Paperwork was manageable. He looked like the word had settled something in him. I was going to write my mother a letter, he said. While I was waiting. I couldn't figure out what to say. You can write it now, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. I can. The shuttle back to Thresh 9 took 31 minutes. Owen sat in the secondary seat and said nothing for the first 20, which I appreciated. The silence had a quality of someone collecting themselves, fitting things back into place, checking that the pieces were all still there. They were. We docked at Thresh 9 at 9:14 in the morning. Reth was at the dock window. He had the risk assessment form in his hand. He was still on question 11. He looked at Owen. He looked at me. He set the form down. I will file the authorization retroactively, he said. That is very reasonable of you, I said. He walked Owen to the station medical bay. I walked to the Deck 4 commissary. The substitute blend was there. I stood at the counter and drank it standing up, and it was not good, but it was warm, and I had been right. I would bring him back. I had known that before I closed the shuttle door. Some things you know before you need to. 3 weeks later, Thresh 9 was different. Not on paper. Nothing in the operational handbook had been revised. No announcement had gone through the station communication system. No one had sat down with me and said, "Here is how things are now going to be." It was not that kind of change. It was the other kind. The kind that happens in a place when something in it recalibrates and everyone adjusts without a meeting, without a memo, without anyone using the word change at all. The lighting in the corridor nearest my quarters had been upgraded. A shift from the 2 blue station standard to something closer to warm white. Better for human eyes, specifically. I noticed it on the first morning, walking to the commissary, and I stopped and stood under it for a moment before I moved on. Nobody mentioned it. There was nothing to mention. The Deck 7 ration dispenser had been restocked. Not just the standard species-neutral items that had always been there, but a new sealed section in the upper left bay, added sometime in the preceding week, stocked with 2 varieties of coffee. Actual coffee. Not the substitute blend from Deck 4. The real thing, 2 different roasts, the labels printed in 3 languages including English, which was the 4th language this station's label system had ever been configured to include. I stood in front of the dispenser for longer than was probably dignified. I ordered the darker roast. Held it with both hands. Drank it standing in the corridor the way I always drink coffee, because the habit is structural and I do not change structural habits lightly. It was good. It was the specific kind of good that something is when you have been waiting for it for a long time without letting yourself call it waiting. Sisek filed my last 3 reports correctly. He did not explain the change. I did not ask. Some things communicate more in the doing than in any explanation, and Sisek had always had a better instinct for documentation than for conversation. Reth completed his behavioral monitoring report. I received the copy I was entitled to under case review access, which was a process I now had committed to memory. The report was 4 words long. No further monitoring recommended. 4 words. I had given him 43 at the start of all this, and he had returned 4, and in the mathematics of this station that was something close to a conversation, and I decided to take it as one. I sent him a 1-word reply. Thanks. He sent back 3. Don't break anything. I did not reply, because that felt like exactly the right place to let a sentence end. Owen Marsh sent a message from the Ardell, which had completed its repairs and returned to its route. He said his mother had written back. He said she had asked who Maravas was and he had not been entirely sure how to answer, so he had told her she was someone from Thresh 9 who had been in the right place. He asked if that was accurate. I sent back, close enough. He sent a photograph of his mother's letter, long and full of the kind of language that comes out of a person when they have been very frightened on someone else's behalf and have come out the other side of it and do not know what to do with the relief except write it down and send it somewhere. He did not explain why he sent the photograph. I did not ask. I read the letter once. Then I stood at the viewport in my quarters and looked at the dock where the Ardell had been, and the empty transit lane beyond it, and the slow steady rotation of the station's outer ring against the dark. Then I went to get coffee. On the 23rd day after the Ardell, Reth came to find me in the commissary. He moved differently than he had 4 weeks ago. Not the careful, measured gait of a person managing their proximity to something they were uncertain about. Something easier. Something that had stopped apologizing for the space it was in. He found me at the counter with the dark roast and sat down on the stool beside me, not nearby, beside, and put a document on the counter between us. "The compact sent a reclassification," he said. I looked at the document. Picked it up. Read it. It was a formal designation change. Not a rank adjustment. Not a posting modification. A classification change, the kind that required authorization from 3 separate administrative departments and a flag in the compact-wide personnel registry. The designation they were applying to me had a long official name in compact standard that translated, approximately, to Mobile Autonomous Tactical Resource. In practical terms, it was a classification that had previously been applied to 2 classes of small armored vessels and 1 experimental weapons platform the compact had quietly decommissioned 4 years ago. They were applying it to a person. To me. I read it twice. Reth waited. "Cool, cool, cool," I said. He tilted his head. "Is that good?" "It means I am processing," I said. "Ah." A pause. "The designation includes a formal reassignment offer. There is a long-range mission group. Multi-species tactical unit, operating in the outer transit corridors. They have been requesting a human crew member with cross-species field experience for approximately 8 months. I looked at the document. Then at the coffee. Then out the commissary viewport at the empty dock and the quiet lane. "I am thinking about it," I said. He nodded. He straightened his jacket the way he did when he was closing something out, a small habitual gesture I had noticed in the 3rd week, and filed away without deciding to. He stood up. Then he stopped. He reached into the document folder he had carried in and set a second piece of paper on the counter beside the reclassification. Compact standard paper. Handwritten, which was not the usual format for any correspondence this station generated. "From OSSRN," he said. "Doc 6. He left. I looked at the paper. Picked it up. Unfolded it. It was written in Veth script with a translation below it in careful, precise English, the kind of English written by someone who learned it from formal materials and was being very deliberate about each word. The letter was not long. It said that OSSRN had filed a testimony during the deposition process about the day he watched me move the crate on Dock 6 8 months ago. He said the testimony was accurate. He said it was also incomplete. He had written about the weight. He had written about the expression on my face. He had not written, because he had not had the language for it then, that watching me move the crate had been the first moment since he had been assigned to Thresh 9 that he had felt certain, completely certain, that someone nearby was fully capable of handling whatever came next. He had found the language since then. He wanted me to have it. At the bottom of the letter, below his signature, he had drawn something. Small, careful lines. A dock. A crate. 2 figures, one clearly Veth, one taller and differently proportioned. The taller figure had both hands on the crate. The drawn figure was not dramatic. It was calm. It looked like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I folded the letter. Put it in my jacket pocket next to the stylus, which I still carried because it was mine now, scratched cap and chewed top and all. I sat at the commissary counter and finished the dark roast. Outside the viewport, the transit lanes ran their quiet routes through the dark. The dock where the Ardell had been was empty now, just dock lights and the slow structural tick of the outer ring doing what it was designed to do, holding everything together by staying exactly where it was. Fell, the young crew member who had pressed himself to the wall 6 weeks ago and written a letter he did not send, had apparently sent 3 letters since then. I knew this because he had been reassigned to a corridor duty shift that overlapped with my night walks, and on the 3rd night he had not pressed himself to the wall. He had nodded at me. Carefully. From a safe distance, but a chosen distance, not a frightened one. I had nodded back and kept walking and thought about how much work it takes to change the thing you do by instinct into the thing you do by decision. I thought about that a lot, those 3 weeks. About what the difference costs. About whether the difference is visible to anyone watching from the outside, or whether it just looks like someone who has always known how to walk through a corridor. Kelso in supply coordination had processed the standing coffee order without being asked a second time. She had added a note to the station supply manifest under human crew dietary requirements, a category that had previously existed but had contained only 2 entries, both cross-referenced to species-neutral alternatives. It contained 4 entries now. Real entries. Not alternatives. Josvel, the IA commander who had written the 6-page testimony, had sent a formal case closure notice through standard channels. In the optional notes field, which most case closure notices left blank, he had written 4 sentences. He said the review had been instructive. He said the incident at the hearing had been, upon reflection, a demonstration rather than a failure of control. He said the station's original behavioral monitoring protocol had been designed for species whose restraint and capability exist on the same scale. He said he had submitted a formal recommendation that this protocol be revised. He had not addressed the note to me specifically. He had addressed it to case file 7741 Thresh. I was the case file. It felt like being written to, in the careful way of someone who does not want to make something larger than it is. I appreciated that. In the Compact's documentation archive, I found out later, a footnote had been added. Not announced. Not flagged. Simply placed in the appropriate cross-reference, filed correctly, under the right category heading. The footnote addressed the behavioral assessment of Class 9 Deathworld species in diplomatic and operational contexts. It noted that existing frameworks should be understood as insufficient for this classification. It stated that the observed capacity for restraint in human crew should not be interpreted as an absence of capability, and that future engagement protocols should account for the distinction between containing a thing and not possessing it, as these are not equivalent states, and the documentation had not previously required this distinction to be made explicit. It recommended a full review of human crew classification standards. It referenced Incident 7741 Thresh. Nobody had signed the footnote. It had simply appeared, formatted correctly, filed in the correct category, without anyone needing to be asked twice. I thought about that. About the footnote arriving and signed in the right place. About CISIC filing things correctly without explanation. About the warm white light in the corridor and the coffee in the Deck 7 dispenser and Reth sitting beside me at the counter instead of nearby. About Fel nodding at me in the corridor and the distance between a frightened distance and a chosen one. About what a place looks like when it is doing, quietly and without announcement, the small work of becoming a place where a person can exist without having to explain themselves at every door. I picked up the reclassification document. Read it one more time. Thought about the long-range mission group in the outer transit corridors, requesting a human crew member with cross-species field experience for 8 months. Thought about what cross-species field experience meant in a document like this, and what it actually meant in practice, and whether those two things were the same thing or adjacent things that happened to share a name. Thought about Owen Marsh on the Ardell, writing letters his mother actually received. Thought about OSS Ren's careful drawing of 2 figures at a dock. Thought about a table, both halves still level, still structurally sound, sitting in a hearing room that nobody had scheduled another hearing in. I set the document face down on the counter. Finished the coffee. Both hands, the way I hold something warm when I have been cold for a long time and the warmth has stopped feeling like something I might lose. I rinsed the cup. Set it on the counter. Got up. Put the reclassification document in the pocket opposite the one holding OSS Ren's letter. 2 pieces of paper. One that said what the Compact thought I was, and one that said what one cargo officer on Dock 6 had felt standing in the space I had just cleared. I walked out of the commissary into the warm white-lit corridor, which was better for my eyes, and I walked the way I walked, the way that Fel had described as someone who had learned to move through spaces not made for them, which was accurate and which I was not going to argue with, because it was true, and true things do not require argument. I had learned. Thresh 9 was learning. The footnote in the archive had no signature, but it had been filed in the correct category, and the correct category is the part that matters. The part that says, I know what this is now. I know where it goes. I know what to do with it. That is not a small thing. That is not nothing. The corridor was quiet. The station turned its slow turn in the dark. Somewhere in the outer transit lanes, freight vessels ran their routes and cargo clerks wrote letters home, and the long, unremarkable work of getting from one place to another kept going the way it always had. I had a 2-week response window on the reassignment offer. I was going to think about it. Not right now, though. Right now I was walking, the way I always walked, and the light was better, and there was real coffee in the dispenser on Deck 7, and somewhere in the files of this station the table was still on record as evidence of a woman being very calm. Both halves level. Structurally sound. Still holding.